What if the people sworn to protect and serve became the very ones you needed protection from? Today, we delve into a case that shook America to its core. A story of trust betrayed, justice delayed, and a young life cut tragically short in the dead of night. In Louisville, Kentucky, a routine police raid would spiral into one of the most controversial cases of our time, forever changing how we view law enforcement accountability and racial justice in America. This is the story of Breonna Taylor, and the dark revelations that followed her death would leave a nation questioning who they could really trust. At The Real Crime Diary, we believe in uncovering the full truth behind these tragic events, and today's story will show you just how deep this rabbit hole goes. In the heart of Louisville, Kentucky, Breonna Taylor was living what many would consider the American dream. At just 26 years old, she had already carved out a meaningful career as an emergency room technician at the University of Louisville Health Center. Those who knew her described her as dedicated, compassionate, and always ready with a smile for her patients, even during the most challenging moments. Her colleagues remember her as someone who went above and beyond, often picking up extra shifts and staying late to ensure her patients received the best possible care. She had dreams of becoming a nurse and was actively working towards that goal, taking additional courses while maintaining her full-time position at the hospital. Living with her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, in a modest apartment on Springfield Drive, Breonna had created a peaceful life for herself. She was close with her family, particularly her mother, Tamika Palmer, who spoke of her daughter's determination to make a difference in people's lives. Friends described their relationship as loving and stable, with the couple often spending quiet evenings at home after their demanding work schedules. In early 2020, like many healthcare workers, Breonna was adapting to the emerging challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. She remained committed to her role on the front lines, showing up day after day to help those in need. There was nothing in her daily routine that would suggest she would soon become the center of a national tragedy. Nothing to indicate that her name would become a rallying cry for justice across America. The peaceful night of March 13, 2020, shattered at approximately 12:40 a.m. when Louisville Metro Police Department officers arrived at Apartment 4 of 3003 Springfield Drive. The officers were there to execute what was supposed to be a no-knock search warrant, though they would later claim they announced themselves, a point of contention that would become crucial to understanding the tragedy that followed. Inside, Breonna Taylor and Kenneth Walker were asleep in bed. The couple had spent the evening watching a movie and had drifted off to sleep, with no idea that their lives were about to change forever. The sound of aggressive banging at their door startled them awake. Walker would later testify that they both called out, asking who was there, but received no response. Frightened and uncertain of who was trying to enter their home in the middle of the night, Walker, a licensed firearm owner, grabbed his gun. The door burst open, and in that moment of chaos and confusion, Walker fired a single shot, striking Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly in the leg. The response was devastating. 3 officers, Mattingly, Brett Hankison, and Miles Cosgrove, unleashed a barrage of gunfire into the apartment. In mere seconds, 32 bullets tore through the home. They pierced through walls, windows, and furniture. 6 of those bullets found Breonna Taylor. As Kenneth Walker called out to her in panic, Breonna, who had been standing in her hallway, was fatally wounded. No drugs were ever found in the apartment, and the main target of the investigation didn't even live there. The tragedy unfolded in mere minutes, but its impact would reverberate across the nation. In the immediate aftermath, as Walker desperately called 911 for help, Breonna Taylor lay dying in her hallway. Despite being an emergency medical technician who had dedicated her life to saving others, no medical attention was provided to her for more than 20 minutes after she was shot. In the days following Breonna Taylor's death, confusion and misinformation clouded the tragic events of that night. The Louisville Metro Police Department initially released a bare-bones incident report that contained multiple errors, including listing Taylor's injuries as none. This glaring oversight would later become a symbol of the department's mishandling of the case. For months, the story remained largely a local concern, with Taylor's family struggling to get answers about why their loved one had died in such violent circumstances. But as spring turned to summer, the nation's attention suddenly focused on Louisville. The death of George Floyd in Minneapolis had sparked a renewed conversation about police violence, and Breonna Taylor's story emerged as another crucial chapter in this ongoing narrative. Social media became flooded with calls for justice, as activists and ordinary citizens shared Breonna's story. They spoke of a young woman who had dedicated her life to helping others as an EMT, who had dreams of becoming a nurse, whose life was cut tragically short in her own home. Her face appeared on magazine covers, billboards, and protest signs across the country. As public pressure mounted, more details emerged about the investigation that led to the fatal raid. Questions arose about the warrant's legitimacy, the police department's procedures, and the lack of accountability in the immediate aftermath. The case quickly became a rallying cry for police reform advocates, who pointed to the tragedy as evidence of systemic issues in law enforcement practices. Local protests in Louisville grew into sustained demonstrations, with people gathering night after night demanding transparency and justice. The city became an epicenter of the broader movement for racial justice, as Breonna Taylor's name joined a long list of Black Americans whose deaths at the hands of police sparked nationwide demands for change. The road to justice in Breonna Taylor's case took several significant turns in the months following her death. In September 2020, the city of Louisville agreed to pay her family $12 million in a wrongful death settlement. But this wasn't just about money. The settlement came with commitments to meaningful police reforms, including changes to how search warrants would be executed and new requirements for officer drug testing. Even before the settlement, the Louisville Metro Council had taken a historic step by unanimously passing Breonna's law. This groundbreaking legislation banned the use of no-knock warrants in the city and mandated that officers wear body cameras during all searches. It was a direct response to the circumstances that led to Breonna's death, and other cities across the nation began considering similar measures. But the most anticipated moment came in September 2020, when Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron presented the case to a grand jury. The announcement of their decision sent shockwaves through the community. Only one officer, Brett Hankison, would face charges, not for Taylor's death, but for wanton endangerment related to shots fired into neighboring apartments. The other officers involved in the raid faced no charges at all. The decision sparked immediate outrage. Protesters filled the streets of Louisville and cities across America. The controversy deepened when grand jury members later spoke out, revealing they weren't given the option to consider homicide charges against the officers who shot Taylor. This disclosure raised serious questions about the handling of the case and the prosecutor's role in the proceedings. What became increasingly clear was that the legal system's response to Breonna Taylor's death would become as much a part of her story as the tragic events of that March night. Each development, from the settlement to the grand jury decision, added new layers to a case that had already captured national attention and sparked demands for systemic change. November 2024 marked a watershed moment in the pursuit of justice for Breonna Taylor. After years of legal proceedings and public outcry, former Louisville Metro Police Department Detective Brett Hankison was finally held accountable. A federal jury in Louisville found him guilty of violating Taylor's civil rights during the fatal raid of March 2020, specifically for using excessive force when he fired 10 shots into her apartment. This verdict represented the first time any officer faced criminal accountability in connection with Taylor's death. The jury determined that Hankison's actions were not just reckless, but constituted a direct violation of Taylor's constitutional rights. His shots, which prosecutors argued were fired without a clear target, endangered not only Taylor, but also her neighbors, a fact that would prove crucial in securing the conviction. The gravity of this verdict cannot be understated. Hankison now faces the possibility of life in prison, with his sentencing scheduled for March 2025. For Taylor's family and supporters, who had weathered years of disappointment and setbacks in their quest for justice, this conviction offered a measure of vindication. It demonstrated that while justice may be delayed, persistent advocacy and scrutiny of law enforcement actions can eventually yield results. The conviction sent ripples through police departments nationwide, serving as a stark reminder that officers can and will be held accountable for excessive use of force. It also validated the years of protests and calls for reform that followed Taylor's death, proving that the public's voice and demand for justice could not be silenced. The story of Breonna Taylor fundamentally changed how we think about policing in America. Her death sparked a movement that reached far beyond Louisville, touching communities across the nation and forcing us to confront difficult questions about justice, accountability, and the value we place on human life. The reforms that followed, from the banning of no-knock warrants to increased scrutiny of police practices, represent important first steps. But perhaps the most profound impact has been on our collective consciousness, as we've come to understand that justice isn't always swift. But it is possible when we refuse to let the truth fade into silence. The conviction of Brett Hankison in 2024 wasn't just about one officer or one case. It was about setting a precedent that reminds us that no one is above the law, and that every life lost deserves accountability. For Breonna's family, while no verdict can bring her back, this outcome offers some measure of the justice they've sought for so long. This case continues to evolve, with new details and developments emerging regularly. For an in-depth look at the evidence that led to this historic conviction, and to understand how this case continues to shape police reform efforts nationwide, visit therealcrimediary.com. There, you'll find exclusive analysis, timeline updates, and insights into how this watershed moment is influencing policy changes across America. Remember, each story we cover isn't just about the past. It's about shaping a future where justice isn't just an ideal, but a reality we can count on. Until next time, keep questioning, keep caring, and keep seeking truth. Hey listeners, welcome back to The Real Crime Diary. I'm your host, Sean Dupree. If you tuned in last time, we had a deep dive into the disturbing history of power abuse across different eras, looking at the connection between dominance, control, and how it plays out even today. We touched on scandals from the past and compared them with some modern-day examples, showing how these patterns of abuse, unfortunately, persist. One of the most insightful tools we've explored to understand this is my book, Power, Pleasure, and Pain, a study of abuse through time. It's not just a historical account, but an interdisciplinary approach to understanding why this keeps happening. We draw from history, philosophy, and modern case studies to explain how figures like Dominique Pellico, Harvey Weinstein, and others have exploited their positions of power for their own gain, often protected by the very systems meant to stop them. Recap of last interaction. In our last live stream, we discussed how libertinism, philosophically introduced by figures like Marquis de Sade, has shaped the way power and pleasure have been entangled throughout history. This concept ties directly into how figures like Weinstein operated, as we saw parallels between de Sade's fictional characters and the way powerful men manipulated their victims in real life. You guys had some amazing comments, asking how societal structures have allowed these behaviors to go unchecked for so long. It's a crucial question, and one that the book addresses deeply. Why this book is valuable. Now, what's powerful about Power, Pleasure, and Pain is its ability to break down these historical patterns and link them to the present. You're not just reading about ancient Rome or Enlightenment philosophy. You're seeing how these ideologies are alive today. The book uncovers how sexual violence and control have been systematically woven into the fabric of societies from ancient times right up to the modern era. It's about understanding not just the individual predators, but the systems that protect them, whether it's in royal courts, religious institutions, or today's corporate and entertainment worlds. Through these historical lenses, we also explore movements like #MeToo that are beginning to dismantle these structures. The fight for justice is far from over, but as the book demonstrates, we are in the midst of a cultural shift where legal reforms are finally addressing these long-standing issues. It's more than a history lesson. It's a guide to understanding and supporting change today. What's next? If you want to dive deeper, I suggest picking up Power, Pleasure, and Pain, a study of abuse through time. It's available now, and trust me, it will change the way you think about power, pleasure, and control. We've even got some exclusive content coming up on the channel where we'll be exploring the book's case studies in even more detail, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to The Real Crime Diary so you don't miss any updates. Let's keep this conversation going, because understanding the past is key to changing the future.